And so growing up, I thought my dad was in construction for a while. I thought he was a stockbroker of some sort because he would watch the markets all the time. And so really, when I became a financial advisor, I thought if I can help people like my dad sleep better at night because they're doing the right thing and they know that they're doing the right thing with their money, then that's going to impact their lives. That's going to impact their families. And eventually it's going to impact their practices.
Paging Dr. Cook. Paging Dr. Cook. Dr. Cook, you're wanted in the OR. Dr. Cook, you're wanted in the OR.
Welcome to the Prescription for Success podcast with your host, Dr. Randy Cook.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Prescription for Success. I'm Dr. Randy Cook, your host for the podcast, which is a production of M.ed Coaches, providing leadership and executive coaching for physicians by physicians to overcome burnout, transition your career, develop as a leader, or whatever your goal might be. Visit M.ed Coaches on the web at mymdcoaches.com because you're not in this alone. My guest today has a really interesting story that arcs from his childhood as the son of a physician through an extensive international liberal arts education, and finally his current position as a certified financial advisor with a particular interest in physician clients. So let's hear my conversation with Galen Nuttall. Well, welcome, everybody. I'm really looking forward to my conversation today with Galen Nuttall, who is a certified financial planner up in Belleville, Ontario. I had the pleasure of being a guest on Galen's awesome podcast, A Clean Bill of Wealth, several months ago, and I'm looking forward with our conversation today. So, Galen, thanks so much for joining us and welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. No, I'm very excited. Yeah, we had an amazing conversation a couple months ago, and happy to have another one.
Well, I'm really glad to have you, and really looking forward to picking your brain a good bit because I think you have a really fascinating story. I know that you are the son of a physician. I wonder if at some point your parents had in mind that you were destined to become a physician. After all, you're named after one of the most famous physicians of all time. Is there a story there at all?
Yeah, tough to keep up with the name Galen, I guess. the father of lots of core beliefs around the medicine that wasn't debunked
Indeed.
Until not too long ago.
Right.
Yeah, no, I'd say so. My dad's he's a now retired nephrologist, and when I was growing up, he had a private practice, a dialysis practice in Georgia, actually, when I was little. And my mom was a nurse practitioner, so certainly both in the medical field. I wouldn't say that either of them really pushed me or discouraged me or encouraged me in any way towards medicine. So they really were, letting me be free to choose my own path. And
Sure.
I can't remember if I told you this or not, but I did go pre-med for a little while. I was studying. I was getting my undergrad degree, which was Bachelor of Liberal Arts, and I thought I might make the switch to med school. And so I did a summer at Johns Hopkins, and then I did a summer in New York City at Bellevue Hospital as part of an internship they have there for young folks that think they might be going into medicine. And those two experiences were enough for me to start thinking that maybe medicine wasn't the right fit for me.
Yeah.
I mean, I knew I wanted to make a difference in the world, but at this particular hospital in New York, and I think that's part of just how it all shook out, was I met enough doctors that weren't particularly happy that I wondered whether it was going to be a good fit for me. And the sacrifice, my gosh, like once someone finally sat me down and walked me through, pre-med, med school, residency, fellowship, like the whole shebang, I said, I'm not sure if I can do this. And the final thing that was the nail in the coffin was I was running marathons at the time and very religiously getting at least 8 hours of sleep every night. And I did this internship, and they showed me the cot that the on-call physician slept on and the residents slept on in this teeny little room, and how they'd get an hour of sleep here or there. And I just thought, I don't know if I can do this.
Yeah, I guess that's a pretty good, particularly at a place like Bellevue. It's a good place to see just how bad it can get in a physician. But at the very onset of your undergraduate education, were you giving it any serious thought, or was it, or were you truly where you should have been, where we're all told that we should be, and that is, look around, you're not a kid anymore, see what the landscape looks like and pick something, or were you leaning one way or the other?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that I was halfway through my undergrad, and I was starting to really wonder what I was going to do with myself when I graduated with a Bachelor of Liberal Arts degree, because the path is not so clear. And I started to kind of get concerned, like, well, what am I going to do at the end of all this? Like, there's not jobs out there for philosophers. So I wasn't 100% sure what I was going to do with myself. Now, looking back, I was definitely in the right place, and I'm very grateful that I stayed there, because, most of my adult life has been in some form of education. I became a teacher. I have a master's in education, and I spend most of my client time educating my clients. And so, having spent quite a bit of time studying the great books of philosophers and different thought leaders like, Jung and people like that, ended up being really valuable for me in ways of, I think, explaining things in ways that make sense to people in an industry that can be very convoluted and confusing. So in the end, I'm very grateful that I finished. I went to a school called St. John's College in Annapolis, Maryland. It's called the Great Book School, where the first semester you read things like Homer and Aristotle, and then the last semester of the 4 years, you're reading things like Lincoln and Mark Twain and stuff like that. So it kind of takes you through the history of different literature and philosophy and math and science. So it ended up being a perfect fit in the end.
You actually did what, frankly, I think all young people are encouraged to do if they're thinking about medicine, and that is to get a good liberal arts education. But it sounds like what the liberal arts did for you was to simply make you think that you would fit better someplace else. Am I on the right track?
Yeah, definitely. It was it was a good thing for me to go and try to get those couple credits of pre-med at Johns Hopkins. And it was good for me to go to Bellevue to really try it on. Because I think a lot of people, and my dad's one of these people, his idea was, oh, I'm going to be a doctor, and that's that. And he wanted to be other things potentially along the way, but there was a bit of pressure from his family to go for it, become a physician. And he's a very good physician. I think at the end of the day, I interviewed him for my podcast, and he says that he's glad he stuck it out. But I am grateful that I went out there and tried a few things. I tried it on, and it didn't fit. And exactly what you're saying around that background. And it's interesting because at the time when I went to Bellevue, a lot of the people I went with, young people, their mind was set. Like, they were going to become physicians. They were already getting all their credits. They were like well on their way. And a lot of them, that was their trajectory. And, I really did see that a lot of them maybe hadn't looked outside of that trajectory for what might be a better fit for them personally. And so I was pretty grateful to have been able to do that.
And to say that you got a liberal arts education during your undergraduate years is a little bit of an understatement. You did a lot of things that I find fascinating. You spent some time at the New York Film Academy. Were you seriously considering being a filmmaker?
Yeah, I was, and it's pretty interesting. So my dad's lived in New York for many years now. I grew up in the South, and then little by little, my dad migrated up to New York. And so I did the Bellevue experience one summer. It's a summer-long program for kids that are interested in becoming doctors. So I did that. And then they invited me to come back and coordinate the program because I had sort of tightened up some of their processes and kind of like taken a bit of a leadership role inside of that program. And they asked me to come back and lead it. And I was on the fence as to whether I was going to do that or film school, the summer program at New York Film Academy. And I went to the New York Film Academy, and this is like 1998 or 9, like pre-DVD. And I went to them and I said, can you just show me a sample film of something that somebody's made here? And they took me off to a room, and they found a TV with a VHS, and they popped it in. And it was a short film, like 8-9 minutes or something. And I was really fascinated by what this person had made. So in that moment, I said, I'm not going to go back to Bellevue. I'm going to make short films for a while and see if that's what I end up doing. And so I did that program, which was a bit more than a summer, where at the time it was, we shot it on film, a very expensive process.
Really?
It was the last year that they used film. And
You're the last of a dying breed,
and it was a very special kind of film.
or even a dead breed.
Yeah, it's gone now. It was a very special film. It was very expensive. So my final project was 10 or 12 minutes long. And I think in film alone, I spent something like $1,200 because I can't remember the cost, but I think every minute of film was like $20. And like you'd mess up half the reels because you had to go get them developed and see if they turned out okay.
It was a lot of money back then.
It was a lot of money back then. And I mean, you could make a 10-minute video on a phone for, $0 right now.
Right.
So it was great. I met a lot of really amazing people, and it was a really fun, creative summer. And I really did plan on sticking with that industry. And I had an offer to be director of photography for a documentary, but I also made another decision, which was to move to Venezuela at the time. But it could have been a trajectory I ended up on, I guess.
Hi, I'm Rhonda Crow, founder and CEO for M.ed Coaches. Here on RX for Success, we interview a lot of great medical professionals on how they grew their careers, how they overcame challenges, and how they handle day-to-day work. I really hope you're getting a lot of great information. But if you're looking for an answer to a specific problem, management or administration challenge, or if you're feeling just a bit burnt out, like maybe you chose the wrong career, well, then there's a faster way to get the help you need. No, it's not counseling, it's coaching. RX for Success is produced by M.ed Coaches, a team of physicians who have been where you are. I know you're used to going it alone, but you don't have to. Get the support you need today. Visit us at mymdcoaches.com to schedule your complimentary consultation. Again, that's mymdcoaches.com, because you're not in this alone.
We'll get back to our interview in just a moment, but right now I want to tell you a little bit about Physician Outlook. If you haven't discovered this remarkable magazine, please do so very soon. It was created by physicians, for physicians, to showcase the intersection between clinical and non-clinical interests, whether it's writing, painting, cooking, politics, and dozens of other topics. Physician Outlook gives a physician perspective. It's available online and in print. It's really unique among physician lifestyle magazines. And like the Prescription for Success podcast, Physician Outlook amplifies the voice of any physician who has something to say. It also engages patients who still believe in physician-led, team-based care. And Prescription for Success listeners can get 3 months free when you enter our promo code RX for Success and select the monthly option at checkout. That's a really great deal on this stunning publication. And now let's get back to today's interview. Well, speaking of moves, another thing that I'm curious about, I know that you spent some of your early life in the South, and I'm wondering which part of the South, and I'll tell you the reason that I'm asking the question is I'm a native Southerner, and typically it's not a place where you find a great many intellectual mentors and models to follow. So what was it like for you growing up in the South, and what part of the South did you grow up in?
Yeah, good question. So I was born in Georgia. I was born in Rome, Georgia. It's about an hour and change outside of Atlanta. And I lived there for a bit.
Near where I am right now.
Yeah, that's right. And I know I've got family roots in the South. I've got family in Louisiana, family in Virginia. So I grew up in Georgia, moved around a bit, ended up in North Carolina, went to school in Maryland, which, I mean, up here in Canada, we'd call that the South, maybe, but growing up, we wouldn't call Maryland the South. But so Georgia and North Carolina mostly, and Georgia was pretty young. Like we left Georgia when I think I was 5 or 6. So most of my upbringing in the South was North Carolina.
Fuzzy memories.
it's funny. I've ended up in Belleville, Ontario, which is a town almost the same size as Rome, Georgia. I don't know if Rome still only has one mall, but it certainly only had one when I lived there. And it has like all these beautiful old brick buildings with a river running through the town. And Belleville's the exact same way. We've got a river running through the town and these beautiful old brick buildings. So it was really funny when we moved here after having lived in places like Caracas, Venezuela, which is like 7 million people, and New York City and Toronto. Moving here, it did feel in a strange way like I was moving home in some respects, because it's a small town, very similar qualities of everyone kind of knows everyone sort of thing, much like Rome, Georgia. And the question around the intellectuals, I mean, it's a good question. And I'd say that I was really fortunate in North Carolina to go to some really good schools. I went to a really good high school called Durham Academy. And I had, I remember a math teacher there who was really great at noticing my interests inside of math and outside of math, things like mythology. So he really encouraged me to look at the work of Joseph Campbell. He's a guy who had his kind of ears attuned to what his students were interested in. And his name is Mr. Ebert. I haven't talked to him forever, but he was really key in me looking at the larger world outside of formal schooling, I guess I'd say.
Yeah, I think you were very fortunate to have made that shift to North Carolina. The deeper you go into the South, as you're probably aware, education is unfortunately not as sophisticated as what you can find elsewhere. But clearly, you found what worked for you. And my next question is, you spent a substantial amount of your life in South America, and I'm very curious about what it was that led you to that decision and what you were doing there.
Yeah, so after film school in New York, I was about 21, I think. So, I mean, the short version of it is when I finished high school, I thought, well, I don't know what I want to do with my life, so I better go to college. So I went to college and I said, here, I'm going to figure out what I want to do with my life. And I was finishing that up and I still didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. So I said, well, let me take a year off of trying to figure all this out. And so I went on what's called a year of service, and it was related to my religion, the Baha'i faith, where you have an opportunity to go and serve in a grassroots level at almost anywhere in the world. I mean, I thought about Greece for a while because I really wanted to go to Greece. I thought about Mexico, and Venezuela just kind of came up on the list of places that were looking for people. And I said, let's do it. So the idea was to go for a year, do something completely different, get out of whatever environment I was in to reset my thinking. And so, yeah, go for a year, come back to New York, maybe make movies, maybe do something else, who knows. And so I moved there, I think about a month after I turned 22. I barely spoke Spanish. And after I'd been there, so I moved down there to work on grassroots development and education in small, very rural villages in Venezuela, like living in tin roof shacks and having dogs sleep in my bed and give me fleas and all those good things, and giving classes to kids under mango trees. And after I was there for about 5 or 6 months, I started thinking maybe I don't need to go back to America. I was like, maybe I could just stay here and keep doing something like this. And so that year ended up turning into 10 years, partially because I met my wife down there. My wife, she's originally Canadian of Iranian descent. We met down there. And we got married about 4 years after I got down there. And then our son was born there. And then we left when he was just a few years old, ended up in Canada. So basically it was a year that turned into 10. And that's also where I started educating in a more formal setting, got my teaching degree. But it was really, and then I traveled all over South America. I think something like 12 different countries in Central and South America.
Well, I'm going to have to tell you that as an interviewer, I'm struggling to close the circle between third world educator to financial advisor. So you want to see if you can help us make that leap?
Well, it's just it's so cliche, right? No, I always joke with people like, how did you end up in a certified financial planner in Belleville, Ontario after all that? The short version is Venezuela started getting really dangerous. Our son was born down there, blonde hair, blue eyes. People assumed we had money, which we didn't. Kidnapping is a real concern down there. So once he was born, we thought we wouldn't be able to live with ourselves if he got kidnapped. We just said this isn't an option. So we stuck it out for one more year so I could finish a couple years of school, teaching, that is, to have enough years to kind of have a good, for it to look good on my resume. And then we left Venezuela, not sure where we'd end up. We just knew the school year ended and we left. We said, we're not staying here. And so we moved up to Canada, and I started looking for teaching jobs and couldn't really find anything. And my wife found a job. She's a chemical engineer by profession. And so she found a job in Belleville, Ontario. And that's how we ended up here. And after a year or two, I made a career change, partially because my wife hated her job, unfortunately. And she, basically would every time I took her to work, she'd start getting really quiet on the drive to work. The closer we got, the quieter she'd get. And she sometimes would start crying on the way to work. And I said, this has got to stop. So I couldn't find a teaching job, but then my financial advisor said, Galen, I think you'd make a good financial advisor. And my initial reaction was, there is no way on earth I'm doing this.
I was wondering how you were going to close that loop. So it didn't actually necessarily hatch in your brain by itself.
No, absolutely not, because it was very different than anything I'd ever done. I mean, it's financial advising. I mean, the path that I entered is basically a sales role where you come in. It's changed since then, but the way that I came in was under a commission model where if you didn't sell something, you went broke. But they did tell me that the opportunity was there to make decent money, and in the town where I live, there's not a lot of great opportunities for a teacher that can't find work. And so I said, well, let's give it a shot. And initially I said I wasn't interested in for a few reasons. One was I didn't want to be some sort of pushy salesman that was, causing, losing all sorts of friends. And the other reason was I was terrified of managing other people's money and wondering if I was going to get phone calls at 2 a.m. when the markets crash. And I spent months I was interviewing them as much as they were interviewing me, because I was like, this has to be a good fit if I'm going to go for it. And then the thing that happened that made me decide to go for it was this. I felt initially like I was betraying my profession, because I had a teaching degree, a master's in education, and I only had a few years of teaching under my belt. And here I was going to make this complete shift. And I felt like I was really betraying all this work I had done. And I reached out. I needed references for the financial advisor job. And the only people I knew were people that had taught me my former principal, who had hired me for the first time ever as a teacher, and the director of my master's program. And I was really embarrassed to go to them and tell them, like, hey, can I get a reference? Because I'm not going to be a teacher anymore. And both of them said, Galen, I think you're going to be really good at this. And I was kind of expecting them to talk me out of it, like, Galen, come on, don't give up. Maybe you can find a teaching job. But both of them came back and they were really supportive. They're like, Galen, I think you're going to be really good at this. And so that was part of what made me think, well, maybe I am going to be good at this, or maybe I can do this. So I think that's the best I can close the loop on how I ended up as a financial planner.
Clearly you inquired of the right people, because you have been remarkably successful, and your record shows that. And as you began to educate yourself, were you in the beginning interested in directing your business toward physicians as clients, or did that come later?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So when I started, I was so confused about what the whole thing was, because I'd never done anything like this before. I mean, I did start an educational program down in Venezuela pretty much single-handedly. So I did have an entrepreneurial, creative background in doing that, which I didn't realize how much was going to help me as a financial advisor, because I don't punch a clock, no one tells me what to do, so to speak. Like, I have to figure it out on my own, especially in the early days. And pretty early on, I started to think about, how am I going to look different than every other financial advisor or financial planner in Canada? I think there's something like 20,000 certified financial planners in Canada. I think there's 100,000 financial advisors. And so I started to think, like, what's going to make me any different than anyone else?
I was just wondering if you're the only person that ever asked that question, because you're right. One looks much like the other. So.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. Because I started off as a financial advisor, and then I got my certified, at least in Canada, you can't call yourself a financial planner until you get your certified financial planner designation. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of financial advisors and, like people at the bank, and, they have different titles and everything, but certified financial planner, I think there's 20,000 in Canada. And that's a big number. I mean, like, how do you set yourself apart? And so I started looking at that, and I decided the first decision I made was I was going to get really good at corporate planning. People said to me, hey, Galen, farmers make really good clients, doctors make really good, like, people just kind of said, like, you need to go find these people because they're going to make good clients. I said, okay, well, I'll see what I can do. So someone in my extended family, I kind of tracked someone down, and I was like, hey, you're a doctor. Like, can I sit down and just show you what I do? And they said yes. And that was only a few months in. And it was pretty funny because I barely knew what I was doing. I took my director with me, and we had our first meeting with them, and I didn't feel like it went so well. Like I didn't know what, I wasn't really that trained at that moment. I didn't really know what to ask them. I didn't know the process to follow. And so we walked out of there, and then my director, who'd been doing this for years, said, "Oh, I've never sat in front of a doctor before." And I just kind of looked at him like, "Well, why didn't you tell me that before?" Like, what, why? And then I also thought, like, well, why not? I was like, "You've been doing this for 10 years. How come you've never sat in front of a doctor before? Like, why wouldn't you?" So I realized then I needed to forge my own path. I was going to have to figure this out on my own if the person who had hired me wasn't necessarily ready to support me. So I decided to get really good at corporate planning, because I think in the United States, you can do the same thing. You can have a corporation as a physician. Not a lot of financial advisors understand the corporate planning, the tax implications, the different instruments that are available. So I decided to get really good at that. So I just read everything I could get. And there's not a lot out there, to be honest, to learn how to do this. So I did have to talk to a lot of advisors that were a bit ahead of me in this learning. I had to read everything I could get my hands on. So what I'll say is I did take on a few physician clients early on, but I didn't really, do things like start a podcast called Clean Bill of Wealth specifically for physicians, do webinars every month specifically for physicians until a few years ago, partially because it just felt very difficult to say, oh, I'm only going to work with these people, because it feels like I'm letting go of lots of opportunities. And to be fair, like, I don't bring on just physicians as clients, but the majority of my time is working with physicians. That's for sure. And even I do have some doctor clients that aren't physicians, like chiropractors and vets and people like that, but it's mostly physicians. And the big reason I'll say is, the biggest reason is because my own dad, I watched him struggle to get good advice when I was a kid. And I didn't really fully understand what was happening, but the easiest way to sum it up is, one day someone asked me, "What does your dad do?" And it was in front of my dad. So here we are. I think I was still in Georgia. So my dad's got a private practice in dialysis, well-known nephrologist in town, all that. Someone said, "What does your dad do?" And I said, "My dad's in construction." And my dad looked at me. I was probably 5 years old. And my dad looked at me and he's like, "What are you talking about?" And I said, "Well, every day after school, you take us to this old smelly building. There's dust everywhere. There's people with hard hats. You're telling people what to do. People are showing you blueprints. You're in construction." And what my dad was doing at the time was building, like an apartment building to get rental income in retirement. Like he was Sure. doing all that because, as you well know, doctors don't have any sort of, or the vast majority don't have any sort of pension safety net, don't have, group benefits. Like they're on the hook, right? And right. So growing up, I thought my dad was in construction for a while. I thought he was a stockbroker of some sort because he would watch the markets all the time. And so really, when I became a financial advisor, I thought, if I can help people like my dad sleep better at night because they're doing the right thing and they know that they're doing the right thing with their money, then that's going to impact their lives. That's going to impact their families. And eventually it's going to impact their practices. As you well know, being a coach of physicians, physicians who have more peace of mind, their patients do better. They run more efficient practices. There's studies that have shown this, that a happier doctor has better quality for their patients. So that's really what had me sink my teeth into, okay, I'm going to get really good at physician corporate planning in Canada because the ripple effect is just so great.
That's a fascinating story. And I'm sure you discovered right away that there were a lot of physicians who were in the process of making huge mistakes. It's funny to me. I think certainly as a physician, it is possible to accumulate enough currency in the bank, but the wisdom to know what to do with that and how to keep it safe is painfully absent. Is that been your experience?
Yeah, definitely. I think we might have talked about this on my podcast when we talked together, but I think what's there for me for physicians is, I think everyone can fall into the trap of the arrival fallacy. Like when this happens, when I get to this point in my life, everything's going to be taken care of, or I'm going to be happy, like that future someday, right? And I think physicians, the trajectory they follow to get to where they are, it's very ripe for that, right? Like, okay, once I finish finish med school, then I'm going to become a resident and I'm going to match, right? And I'm going to be set. And then it's like, okay, well, as a resident, like things aren't set yet because I still need to find a long-term position somewhere. Once I find that, I'm set. And then it's like, okay, once I pay off my student loans, I'm set. Now it's, once I pay off my mortgage, I'm set. So there's so much in the life of a physician that's things are going to be okay when, or I'll be able to calm down, I'll be able to take it easy when. And so I find that a big part of that is they keep their head down, working really hard. And so I think it's tough on that end of the, I think someday I'm going to, someday something's going to change where I can be more peaceful or more have more peace of mind. And then when it comes to the money side of things, as you well know, a lot of physicians start with a tremendous amount of debt. Yes, they make good money.
They do nowadays.
Yeah,
sure.
They do nowadays. A lot of them have a lot of overhead, depending on the specialty, right? Family physicians in Canada have quite a bit of overhead, offices, staff, and they're one of the lower paid specialties. So it's kind of a paradox of sorts, or a catch-22. And then there's the whole thing, and I can really relate to this, is like, physicians are obviously intelligent people. So I think there's this element of like, I should be able to figure this out on my own. Like I should be able to figure out finances. I should be able to figure out investing, taxes, corporate planning, the whole thing. And I certainly felt this way before I became an advisor. I read all sorts of books on investing. Like I was like, I'm going to figure this out on my own. I'm going to do it myself. And it wasn't until I became a financial advisor and this was my profession that I realized how much I didn't know, even though I was a voracious reader and consumer of information. And physicians are, and I'm going to use this word because it's true, they're targeted. They are targeted. It's not hard to look up the address of a physician's office in Canada. They're listed everywhere. So clients are always bringing me mail they get from other advisors. Hey, here's what I offer. Give me a call. My dad still gets cold calls around finance, like invest in this. Someone calls him up.
And I've been retired for almost 3 years.
Yeah, my dad's retired, and he still gets cold calls of people trying to sell him investments or some sort of tax saving scheme, right? So I feel the physicians are in this paradox of, or this sort of Bermuda Triangle of very busy, right? Very intelligent, probably think they should be able to figure this out, and highly targeted by people who may or may not have their best interests in mind, I think leads a lot of physicians to try to figure it out on their own. And some I think probably do, but I'll say the vast majority don't. And this is based on evidence. I put a survey in a physician group in Canada, and I said, how confident are you that you're using your corporation to its fullest extent? And 82% of physicians who answered, and over 100 answered, they said that they were either not at all confident or only somewhat confident that they were using it efficiently. And then I asked the question, where are you with financial planning? Have you got it all figured out? Or are you totally confused and don't know where to start? And 52% said they were either totally confused and didn't know where to start, or they wished they knew who to trust to guide them. And I think that a lot of physicians see other physicians, like very prominent on social media, prominent in different areas, that are financial, like giving financial advice to other physicians. Like there's a couple in the States, there's a couple in Canada. And I think a lot of physicians think, oh, that guy figured it out. And I say guy because most of the ones I've seen, or all the ones I've seen are guys. That guy's figured it out, so can I. Or I can take their course and I can figure it out. And what I'll say is that some will and some won't. And I'll say the majority in my, in the survey I did and the physicians I see meet with behind closed doors, is they're not going to figure it out on their own because they either don't have the time or the interest.
Yeah, I was curious if there seemed to be some commonality among physicians who are inclined to seek out advice, but from what you're saying, it sounds to me that at least half of them really don't know which questions to ask. Would you agree with that?
I would. Yeah, definitely. Because I think that a lot of financial planning right now is being boiled down to probably a too simplistic form, where it's kind of like, you should only work with advisors who work in this way, like very popular, especially in the States. Like you should only work with an advisor who's a fee-only advisor, which I don't necessarily agree with. I can do fee-only work, but I don't necessarily think it's the best way to go. And the other one is like, what are the fees on the investments? Like, so most of the conversation has boiled down to, where can you get the lowest fee type of investing, which I don't think is the best measure of quality. Where I stand in my career and with the firm I work with is the value of our advice is well worth whatever fee that our clients pay for it. And then if anyone doesn't see the value in the fee, then they shouldn't work with us. But a lot of people do. And so when it comes to just what you said, which is a good point, like, do they know which questions to ask? I'd say no. And no fault of their own, because if you pick up any given book or magazine or listen to a podcast, that's most of what it's going to talk about. And I have great respect for these physicians that have taken time to really figure out the ins and outs of financial planning for physicians and then turned around to teach their colleagues. But what I will say is that a lot of times I think physicians think, I need to figure it all out on my own still. Like, I'm not going to engage a professional.
There is a lot of that.
Yeah, like I'm going to figure it all out. And I meet physicians, last week I met a physician who all his investments have been sitting in cash for 5 years because he's been waiting to figure it all out. And I'm like, you know what your money could have done for you in the last 5 years? Like, while you were trying to figure it all out. And like, yes, you would have paid me some sort of a fee, but my gosh, like you'd be way better off. Like I've met people who've been sitting in cash for 8 years waiting to figure it out since 2008. I met someone the other day. They've been they sold all their investments in 2008, 2009, which is probably a bad idea to begin with. And they've been sitting in cash ever since. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, because, and here's what I'll say is I empathize because before I became an advisor, I didn't know who to trust either. Like I empathize with them because before I became an advisor, I couldn't tell who was giving me good advice or bad advice. Like the advisor I worked with before I became one, I barely worked with the guy because I didn't trust him and I was so skeptical. So I really empathize with this because it's really hard to tell. Like there's not this real solid litmus test of, is this good or bad advice? Because there's so many nuances to our profession. Like there's a lot of nuances to how you go about things. And there's a lot of conflicting opinions of should you do this? Should you do that? So it is tough. Like I really do say, like, I mean, I get why people kind of sit around and say, I'm not sure what I should do because it's tough to know. And it's a big decision, right? This person's going to manage my money. This person's going to be like, my co-captain on the ship towards retirement. This is a big deal. So I definitely feel for people who are in that limbo.
I think that's a really significant stumbling block because we all know that you can't necessarily trust everybody you see.
Yeah.
Regardless of what credentials they may flash at you, it goes physicians as well as it goes for physicians as well as it does for financial advisors. And so you just kind of get hung in that indecisive territory, and it's very difficult to make that decision. Along those same lines, or at least maybe in a parallel sense, I understand it's my own. I believe that I have either seen in your writing or heard in some of the podcasts that you've appeared on that you are an enthusiastic supporter of personal and professional coaching, which, of course, from where we sit at M.D. Coaches, makes us very happy. And I'd like for you to talk about that a little bit and what you think people can gain from personal coaching.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So my podcast, Clean Bill of Wealth, I started out really talking about finances. I think one of my first interviews was a lawyer to talk about corporate structures. And these are good interviews too. I talked to an accountant about corporate planning. And then I asked my dad, and I don't think I'd ever asked him this before. I'd been an advisor for, 7 years at this point. And I said, Dad, what's the biggest thing I can do for my clients? Like, what do you think? And he said, introduce them to a good coach. And it kind of shocked me because, I was wondering whether he was going to say, who knows what he might have said, like, try to save him more taxes or try to do this, and he said, introduce him to a good coach. And the reason he told me that was because he said in his own life, when I was little, he had faced a point in his life, in his words, that he was living a life of quiet desperation, where he had the house, he had the car, he had the practice, he had everything that he was supposed to have, but he still felt like there was something missing. And it wasn't until he got coaching, and this is a while ago. Like this is before coaching was really.
Yeah, we're way back.
It is way back. Yeah, it was something called rational emotive therapy, and I don't remember the guy who did it. I think his name was Casey or something like that. And he helped my dad unpack like all sorts of, in the coaching terminology, like all sorts of things he was holding on to or stories he'd made up about him and the world. And really helped him see through this and lived a better life after that experience. And so, yeah, we were talking a while back, like way before. Now you can find a coach everywhere, but this was, So he said that to me and I thought, my gosh. So I changed the trajectory of my podcast almost instantly. And I said, I'm going to go find physician coaches, people who coach physicians. And I had no clue. There were so many. But I started, and I don't think I'm going to run out for a long, long time because I interviewed one who introduced me to another, who introduced me to another. And like the ball just kind of kept rolling. And then I held a wellness summit about 6 months ago. I set the goal to have I think I set the goal of 50 physicians attend a wellness summit put on by me and 3 other physicians, one who's a specialist in burnout, one who's a specialist in charting efficiency, and one's a specialist in weight loss. All physicians in Canada, all happen to be female physicians in Canada. And we had over 100 physicians attend and stay the entire time. So I'm really proud of that. That was really incredible. And so, so the reason I'm so big on coaching is because I and my wife have experienced the benefits of it. So about how many years ago now, 5 or 6 years ago, I undertook my first coaching experience, which was going to a program that was really all about looking at what are those factors in my life that I'm not aware of that are limiting me in some ways, or making me think certain things about people that may not be true, and really having me look at what relationships in my life were not working. And that coaching experience totally changed the way that I do things in my life and the types of conversations I have and what I think is possible. And so how this ties into my practice is that, a lot of what I do most of what I do is retirement planning for physicians. So if I'm sitting in front of someone who is 2 years into practice and we are talking about retirement planning, we are doing things right now that they are going to benefit from for, if they live to their 90s, they're going to benefit from for 60 years. And they're going to have to wait a while to see the benefits of some of it. Like they might have to wait decades before the decisions that they're making today really pan out. Like when they go to retire and they've got enough money and they've done it in the right way. And so I really started to look at, what can I be doing to help my clients live good lives rather than wait until this retirement when, now I'm going to enjoy my life, or now, that whole arrival fallacy. And so really what I thought was, what better way than to start introducing everyone to as many quality physician coaches as I can find. And the main way I do that is with my podcasts. I do other, the wellness event was another big one. So that's really a big part of my it's really looking at the whole physician. How can I support them and care for them in every arena of their life, especially if I'm not I am in a coaching program right now where I'm being trained to be a coach, but I'm still going to enlist the support of physician coaches that have experience with physicians. I'm not going to take it all on myself.
Well, I think it probably goes without saying that we at M.D. Coaches are delighted to highlight other coaches, other individuals that have the same mindset that we do. And I think you certainly have articulated it very well. There is a great deal to be gained from coaching, and we appreciate you sharing your experience with it. I have really enjoyed this conversation, Galen, and I suspect I could probably take it on for hours and hours. But as we have discussed before, we can only hold the listeners for a finite period of time. So
that's right.
What I think I want to do now is get out of the way and turn the program over to you for just a few minutes. So I will close my mic, and Galen Nuttall is going to share his personal prescriptions for success.
Yeah, so my personal prescriptions for success are, one, when I was preparing for this podcast, I was thinking about what have been really amazing resources in my life in the last couple of years. And one is the books of a man called Stephen Pressfield, who wrote The War on Art, The Artist's Way, and Do the Work. They're very short books, very easy to read, and very fascinating books that I think are very good sort of launchpad into coaching because they have a very, as books go, they have a very unique way of having me look at the things in my life that aren't working and how they might work differently. And the next one is surrounding coaches. Not everyone calls themselves a coach, but when I talk to physicians, they usually have an accountant, they usually have a lawyer, sometimes they have a financial planner like me in their life, and we're all coaches in our own way. And so I really do encourage physicians to look at what would it be like to work with a coach who's there as a third party looking at my life and giving me insight that I may not be able to find on my own. There's a saying, you can't do brain surgery on yourself. And I think that that's true of a lot of the problems we face in life. A lot of problems I've faced in life that I have not been able to see my way through them unless I enlisted the support of another person, an impartial look, someone who's looking at my situation. And I think that's it for me for prescriptions for success.
Well, we appreciate you sharing that wisdom with us, and we really appreciate you being on the podcast with us today, Galen. Before we go, I want to give you one last opportunity to tell people where they can find you, whether it be websites or podcasts or whatever you'd like to share, and upcoming conferences or whatever might be on your mind that you'd like to tell us about. Please go ahead.
Absolutely. So thank you so much. So the number one place to find me is on my website, galenhelpsdocs.com. So my first name is Galen, Galen, and then helpsdocs.com. And that's a website where you can find exactly the type of work I do for physicians, what it looks like to engage my services. You can click a link there to book a half-hour free, no strings attached discovery call to see if you're a good fit for the work that we do. And then Clean Bill of Wealth is my podcast. All you have to do is Google Clean Bill of Wealth podcast, and you'll find it on Spotify, iTunes, everywhere. And then the last thing I'll say is we do have a conference coming up in Canada. It is in person and virtual, and it's all about finances for physicians. So it's being put on by a good friend of mine, Dr. Kevin Milo, who is big into the physician empowerment space in Canada. And it's a 3-day conference. It's the Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So I think it's 3rd, 4th, 5th of June. And the best way, I actually have a discount code for people. So the best thing you can do is, go find me on my website, send me an email. And if you want any more information around that, let me know. And I can send you a discount code for that conference, which should be amazing. It's a lineup of all physician speakers talking about physician finances in Canada. It's going to be amazing. And so galenhelpsdocs.com, best place to find me.
Excellent. And I want to make sure that I emphasize one last thing. I would like for our listeners to know that you are available. Your services are available not only in Canada, but in the U.S. as well. Am I right?
That's right.
All righty. Well, Galen, once again, thank you so much for being our guest today. It has been quite a pleasure, and I'm really grateful that you decided to spend some time with us on Prescription for Success.
No, thank you so much. This has been amazing. The time has flown by, and it's been a lot of fun.
Thank you so much for joining us today. As always, we really appreciate a review from you, and a 5-star rating helps us a lot. These ratings give our show much more visibility, and they help us reach many more listeners. And if you'd like access to exclusive content, head on over to our Patreon page, where you can see membership-only material, including a personal rapid-fire Q&A session with our guests and more. Never want to miss a future episode? Visit our website at rx4successpodcast.com to subscribe. And while you're there, you can offer your very own personal prescription for success on SpeakPipe. As always, very special thanks to Ryan Jones, who created and performs our theme music for the show. And remember, be sure and fill your prescription for success with my next episode.